received the radio electronics degree from the Technical University of Varna, Bulgaria in 1989, and the PhD degree from the University of Electrocommunications, Tokyo, Japan in 1997. From 1998 to 1999, she held a postdoctoral fellowship of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, NSERC, at Dalhousie University and McMaster University. In 1999, she joined the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at McMaster University, where she is currently a professor. Her research interests include inverse scattering, microwave imaging, as well as computer-aided analysis and design of high-frequency structures and antennas. Professor Nikolova has authored more than 270 referred manuscripts, 6 book chapters, and 2 books, including the monograph Introduction to Microwave Imaging. She has delivered 48 invited lectures around the world on the subjects of microwave imaging and detection, as well as computer-aided electromagnetic analysis and design. She is a fellow of the IEEE, the Canadian Academy of Engineering, and the Engineering Institute of Canada. She served as an IEEE Distinguished Microwave Lecturer from 2010 to 2013. We are very excited to hear about microwave and millimeter wave in near-field imaging applications, methods, and challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Parnas. This is a very kind introduction, the full IEEE style biography. Thank you, and it is my pleasure to be with you today, although only virtually. And I'm quite excited to learn that the student chapter at UofT-APS student chapter is actually interested in the microwave and millimeter wave imaging methods. And so let us get going. We are going to focus today on applications in near field imaging, mostly with real-time reconstruction. I'm starting here my timer too, in order to keep track of the time. And so why do we care about microwave imaging and millimeter wave imaging? That is because the penetration of this radiation is very good into many of the optically obscured objects and materials, including clothing, brick walls, dry walls, luggage, living tissue, and many others. At low frequencies, we usually have better penetration. But at high frequencies with shorter wavelengths, we have better image resolution, spatial resolution. So more than often, the microwave imaging systems are ultra-wideband, trying to take advantage of the features of the low frequency and high frequency radiations better. Other than that, the imaging systems may operate in a variety of bands, all the way from 500 megahertz into the millimeter wave bands. And in fact, these days, intense research is going on sub-terahertz imaging. These are the bands between 300 gigahertz and 1 terahertz. What enabled microwave imaging to become quite ubiquitous and a very hot research topic is the availability of compact, on-chip, and relatively cheap electronics. In the low gigahertz range, we currently can purchase whole radios and radars on a single chip. And thanks to the automotive industry, in the 70 gigahertz ranges now, we can buy frequency modulated radar, pulsed radars on a chip, which is quite remarkable. Microwave imaging also has developed various reconstruction methods, which enabled numerous applications, most of which have already seen commercial applications. Perhaps the best known commercially available system is the whole body scanners. These are millimeter wave systems for security inspections that can be found in all major airports around the world. Non-destructive testing of materials and structures for flaws, defects, cracks. Through the wall imaging that can detect the people and their movements behind walls, as well as for the detection of infrastructure such as wiring and pipes behind dry walls. Medical imaging systems are still at the stage of research, but some of them are already being developed for clinical applications and tested in clinical trials. And of course, the underground radars that have been around for quite a while, they work in the low gigahertz regime. And so let me show you one very nice example that is prepared by the team of Professor Zougi at Missouri University of Science and Technology. This is one of the leading teams in the world in millimeter and microwave real-time imaging. Real-time refers to the fact that the images are reconstructed practically simultaneously or immediately after the measurements are taken. You see here that they have developed a wideband microwave camera. Here is the camera for single-sided measurements positioned above a laptop bag. It operates between 20 gigahertz and 30 gigahertz in a frequency sweep manner. In the various compartments of the bag, they have placed cutter and scissors and other objects. And here you see the projection two-dimensional image of the contents of the bag, the cutter and the scissors are viewed well. But the camera is 3D, that is to say, it can focus the images at particular depth, generating slices, two-dimensional images for better viewing of the objects that are at the respective depth from the camera. For example, the image in C shows better the cutter, whereas the image in D shows better the scissors. It also shows better the button of the computer bag, and that is because the compartment is closer there. But let me show you what is meant by real-time video, real-time imaging in the video that Professor Zougi actually sent to me some time ago. And let me go here. This is what we are talking about. Here is the output of the system, because the images are actually reconstructed within 100 to 200 milliseconds. You can actually see the motion even of the objects that are being imaged. The raw data doesn't tell us much. However, the image reconstruction algorithm transfers those raw data through inversion algorithms into images that are meaningful. The tuning of the image along the depth of the object is done here with this sliding bar. Anyway, you can certainly access this video on YouTube as well. I would like to give also credit to the engineers at the Pacific Northwest National Lab, who were the first to develop at the end of the 20th century, the first whole body imagers, millimeter wave whole body imagers. A very nice review article can be found here. These are some results of a cylindrically scanning system that operates in a frequency sweep manner from 40 gigahertz to 60 gigahertz. And you can see that this millimeter wave system very nicely detects various objects that are suspended on the body of the mannequin. By the way, this mannequin is fully clothed, but the millimeter waves are going through the clothes, and you can see here a water bottle, a knife, a gun. At the back, we again see the handgun. We also see a fairly larger gun right here suspended on the mannequin, and also we see that there is some sort of a vest on the back. They have also developed, by the way, low gigahertz systems which achieve almost comparable spatial resolution to the higher frequency system by employing polarimetric measurements. That is, they're illuminating the body with a circularly polarized wave, for example, right-hand circularly polarized wave, but they are receiving only the left-hand circular reflection. And as you can see, the gun is very well seen in this low frequency image as well. More exciting, at least to me, are the applications in medical imaging. They're still in research and development stage. No system, to my knowledge, has yet been approved for any clinical studies. A lot of trials, however, have been reported with real patients, and probably one of the latest ones is coming from the team of Professor Kikawa in Hiroshima University, where they have developed a hemispherical array in the shape of a cross. You see 16 slot antennas, 8 are transmitting, 8 are receiving. They are switched using RF switches. But in addition to the RF switching, The system allows for mechanical rotation to collect more data at various angles, which improves the image. And as you can see, they are reporting some successful trials with the patient. The magnetic resonance MR image here shows a considerable tumor in the breast. And this radar essentially system, because it is a pulse radar system operating from 3 gigahertz to 8 gigahertz, actually successfully shows the tumor. These are slices, but you can see also the 3D image here in a thresholded image that clearly detects the location of the tumor. And so let us talk a little bit about the basic principle of active microwave imaging. The active microwave imaging uses radiation that we generate and illuminate the object under test with a transmitting antenna. The radiation penetrates the object, interacts with its components. The interaction is, of course, determined by the electromagnetic properties of the object under test. And at our frequency ranges, especially millimeter wave, we are mostly concerned with the complex permittivity of the object, the real and imaginary part. And that is because in most materials, the magnetic properties are practically negligible in these frequency bands. Now, active microwave imaging requires at least one calibration measurement, which is nothing else but a measurement of the responses in the absence of an object under test. This measurement is referred to as baseline measurement or reference object measurement or incident field measurement. All of these terms are being used. Of course, the baseline measurements are non-zero, and these are responses that need to be de-embedded from the total responses or total field responses which are acquired with the object under test. The total field response, for example, an S parameter, is essentially a superposition in the simplest possible model of the incident field response and the scattering occurring due to the object under test. And so we have to de-embed the baseline measurement, which carries no information about the object, from the total field measurement. The simplest strategy is to simply subtract the baseline measurement from the total field measurement, and this estimates what is the scattered portion of the response. These scattered portions of the responses are important to us. This is what is our data. Now, that simple de-embedding procedure by subtraction is essentially a Born's approximation of the data, but you should be aware that there are other ways of extracting the scattered field information as well. Now, imaging involves three main components. We need the hardware. And as we said, the hardware through calibration provides our data. It's usually a wideband set of data. Then imaging is a big user of electromagnetics. We use both analytical models as approximations, as well as simulators that perform full wave simulations, such as HFSS or FECO. So all of these are important to us because they help us understand the relationship between the electromagnetic properties of the object under test that we want to image, permittivity or permeability, mostly permittivity really, and the data. This direct relationship between data and the permittivity of the object is termed the data equation, but the data equation is a user of the electric field distribution inside the object. And of course, this electric field distribution in itself depends on the contrast. And so we need also to make sure that this E field distribution observes Maxwell's equations. And those in the literature are referred to as state equations. We are going to focus mostly on the data equation today because these are the equations that are being inverted with real-time or linear reconstruction methods. Now, the inversion strategy in the imaging is a big user of applied math. We are very interested in fast, linear and nonlinear solvers of systems of equations, deconvolution methods, optimization methods, etc., etc. Not to mention image processing, signal processing, etc. So as you can see, it is a very multidisciplinary subject. Let us talk a little bit about hardware. Imaging measurements are quite different from device measurements. Device measurements are typically involving 2 to 6 ports, whereas in imaging, we are acquiring responses that are really on the order of thousands, 10,000, 50,000 measurements of S parameters, for example. And that is because in order to reconstruct an image, we need abundant and diverse data. So a lot of data, and on top of it, we want the data sets to be more or less complementary, independent of each other, so that each measurement adds additional information to the already available information. And so we illuminate the target from various angles. We want to view the target or collect the scattered signals at various angles, if possible, even distances. We want to exploit polarization diversity, that is to measure both copole and cross-pole data, because they too are complementary to each other. And in order to perform that, we need to perform scanning in space. As is illustrated here on a cylindrical surface, for example, in order to acquire abundant and diverse data, we would illuminate the object from one antenna and try and receive the scattering from all around the object, if that is possible. However, we don't stop here. In the next experiment, the next antenna will transmit and all others will receive. And very soon, we are talking about tens of thousands of samples in space. The scanning is typically performed on surfaces, acquisition surfaces of canonical shapes, such as planar, cylindrical, and spherical, not only because it is easier to construct the arrays, but also because this facilitates very fast inversion using Fourier transforms. Now, yes, we want abundant and diverse data. That is as much data as we can get. However, the more the data points are, the longer the measurements take. That's not good either. And so rules have been developed for optimal sampling in space, frequency, time domain, so that we sample just about enough to extract maximum information from the available data. Now, in order to do scanning, we can employ either mechanical scanning or electronic switching. With mechanical scanning, we have the flexibility of adjusting the sampling step and pattern as we wish. Mechanical scanners are excellent for research because they can image just about anything, but they are slow. And so every time we look into an application on a commercial platform, it has to be electronic switching in order to make the measurement faster. And here on the left, you see a photo of a mechanical planar scanner that we use in my lab for imaging in the near zone. You see the one antenna is mounted at top, that's a transmitting antenna actually, and an array of 9 receiving antennas is at the bottom. The object under test is placed on the scanning table, which can be moved laterally in both X and Y direction by stepper motors. So it is actually the object that moves, whereas the antennas are fixed because, as you probably well know, it is not a good idea to move the antennas, connectors, flexing cables during microwave and especially millimeter wave measurements. Now, this is quite slow, but it is good for research. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, you see an array, which is a switched array for breast phantom measurements, or this is biomedical research. These are slot antennas. The slots are facing the tissue phantom. On the back of the PCB, you use the forks, which are electromagnetically coupled to the slots exciting them. We have connectorized the central elements to measure reflection coefficient, making sure the prototype works well. But you will see that in subsequent designs, each of these antenna has actually been equipped with a low noise amplifier. And that is because we work with very weak signals in tissue measurement. So most of these switched arrays used in imaging are not just passive antennas. They're active antennas with at least an LNA, if not the whole radio there, outputting IF band signal. Now let us talk a little bit about the electromagnetic side of it. Just to give you a taste of it, I have shown here the rigorous analytical data equation, the forward model that relates the scattered portion of the S parameters. These are the extracted data that we said we can extract using the calibration measurement and the total field response. This is a constant that we know, so we don't worry about it. What we want to reconstruct is the complex permittivity contrast. And we see that the kernel of this integral equation right here involves the dot product of two fields. One, as theory shows, is the incident field, which is due to the receiving antenna, if this antenna were to transmit. And this actually is, in effect, mathematically the Green's function of our system. We are not too worried about this term because this is an incident field, the field that would exist in the imaged volume in the absence of the object under test. So we can predict it analytically, maybe, approximately, or simulate it, or even measure it. The problem is in the total field. The total field, which is due to the transmitting antenna in the presence of the object under test. Now, this total field, according to Maxwell's equations, of course, in itself, will depend on the contrast, the permittivity contrast of the object under test. By the way, the contrast is nothing but the difference between the permittivity of the object under test, the complex one, and the permittivity of the background. And so, because the total field is implicitly a function of the contrast, then the whole equation becomes nonlinear with respect to the unknown contrast. And so the microwave inverse scattering problem is inherently a nonlinear problem. And you know that large nonlinear problems, especially if they have to be verified through Maxwell equation simulations, in effect, can be very time consuming. By the way, let me make it very clear that all responses that we acquire, let's say in a two-port measurement system, J here is the transmitting port, ith port is the receiving one. All of these responses during scanning become functions of the position R. And because the receiving and transmitting antenna pairs are fixed with respect to each other, we use only one position vector to indicate the position essentially of the antenna pair with respect to the imaged object. You can see here an example of the 9-element bow tie array used for tissue imaging, and this is scanned. So at each position R, we are measuring 9 transmission coefficient responses complex with these bow tie antennas. Now, as I said, if we are going to be inverting a nonlinear problem with tens of thousands of data points, this is going to take forever. So how do we do real-time imaging? Well, what we do is we linearize the forward model. Well, how do we do that? It's inherently nonlinear. Well, from the point of view of linearized scattering, we view the object as a collection of independent point scatters, as is shown here. These independent point scatters are the blue points. And then we can view the response collected by the receiving antennas as the superposition of the scattering emanating from each independent point scatter. And this superposition integral is shown here. Now, this superposition obviously has a kernel here. This is also called the resultant kernel of scattering, but let's call it simply point spread function. Why do we call it point spread function? Because if we want to derive it experimentally, this is exactly what it represents. Let us take this superposition model and apply it to a scatterer, which is essentially a delta function in 3D space. A scatterer like this one. It exists only at one point in 3D space. And so it is represented by this 3D delta function. The position of the scattering probe or scattering point is RSP. Now you can see that in accordance with this model, if I have a scatterer like that of unit contrast, I will measure exactly the point spread function of the system. And so the point spread function of the system can be either obtained experimentally or, as I will show to you, also analytically. And so further, if we assume the background to be uniform, then that model further simplifies to a convolution, because the only thing that matters really is the mutual position between observation point, R, and point of scattering, R prime. And so this PSF here, which has an index of 0, is nothing but the PSF that we would measure with the scattering point right at the center of the imaged volume. So one measurement with the scattering probe at the center, and we have the point spread function or the resultant kernel of our imaging system. By the way, it is good also to know what the volume of the scattering probe is and its actual contrast if we want to reconstruct quantitative images, images that will actually tell us the real and imaginary part of the permittivity at each position of the scattering of the object under test. Now, we have to be aware that this is an approximation. In reality, these scattering objects inside our overall object are interacting. There is mutual coupling, there are multiple scattering effects as is illustrated here, and although mathematically these effects are second-order effects, they can actually quite significantly affect the external responses collected by our antennas. And so we need to understand what are the implications of the linearizing approximation in real-time imaging. And so let us compare the rigorous model and the approximate model. It is clear that this PSF relates to the term in the square brackets. And then how is it that the rigorous model depends, the kernel depends on the contrast, whereas in the linearized model of scattering, the PSF doesn't? Well, you can immediately understand what is happening here by remembering that the PSF is the response from a point-like object. If the object is really that small, we can assume that the field inside its volume, the total field, internal field, is actually more or less equal to the incident field, the field that would be at that point R prime if the scattering point was not there. And this really is known as the Born's zeroth order approximation, which is honoring Max Born, who was the first one to develop these approximations for the cases of quantum scattering. And that is why we now see that our PSF does not depend on the contrast. And moreover, we have now derived an analytical formula for the kernel or the PSF that is utilized in real-time linearized microwave imaging. We see that it depends on the incident fields due to the transmitting and receiving antenna when the receiving antenna is transmitting. Anyway, also this allows us to understand what will happen if our object under test violates the limitations of Born's approximation. These limitations are very well known, rigorously derived, and we can predict that if these limitations are violated, then the images will contain errors. These errors are known as artifacts. And the artifacts show essentially contrast where contrast doesn't exist. And the contrast or scattering object appears in these images only due to the difference between the actual total field and the assumed incident field. Let me show you some artifacts like this in the whole body scanner images. Do you see this bright area between the legs of the mannequin? There's nothing there. It's air. But the image shows that there is something there. What is actually happening is that there is a lot of multiple scattering between the legs of the mannequin, which distorts. Of course, we no longer have incident field here. We have a total field, which is very different. So that's an artifact due to the linearizing approximation in the model. Very similar artifact you can see here in the right image between the arm and the body. Again, there is nothing there. This is an image artifact. And so, okay, how do we get those PSFs? First and foremost, let me get to the bottom of the page. We can measure it, and that is always desirable because measured PSFs enable quantitative imaging. They give the response of the system related to the actual contrast and volume of a scattering point or probe. They are also usable in near zone imaging, where analytical approximations of the PSF are impossible. Actually, the whole body scanners, because they work in Fresnel and far zone relative to the antennas, they use analytical expressions for the point spread functions. And you can understand easily where these analytical expressions are coming from, bearing in mind that the point spread function is nothing but the dot product between the incident fields of two antennas. And so if we are in the far zone of these antennas, we know that the fields behave in the far zone as locally spherical waves, exponent minus jkr over r. Of course, analytical approximations like this do not take into account the antenna gain, the strength of the transmitter, all sorts of losses. However, they are good for qualitative imaging. Just the location of scatters, their shape, their distribution. For quantitative imaging, if you want the real and imaginary part of the permittivity, you need measured point spread functions. Let me introduce to you, just in one slide, the principle of microwave holography. Microwave holography is a real-time, super efficient computationally image reconstruction method, which currently drives the whole body scanners and a lot of other commercial systems. It is arguably the most computationally efficient method, and it also is the simplest. Look, I'm summarizing the whole inversion procedure for you here in one slide. Let us assume we've got planar scanning. Here is my data. Here is a known constant, which is determined from the contrast of the scattering probe and its volume. Here is the point spread function that I could measure or approximate analytically for my system. And here is the unknown contrast. Now, the Z bar indicates the location of the measurement surface, and it appears also in the PSF. And I can now appreciate immediately the fact that the integration in X prime and Y prime is nothing but a convolution. What is convolution in Fourier space? Multiplication. And so what we do, we transfer this equation in Fourier space. We take two-dimensional fast Fourier transform of our data along xy. Same thing with the point spread function, datas. And then what I will find from this model is the Fourier space contrast function. Now, I'm going to discretize the Z integral into a sum. And what do I get? An equation. A linear equation in the unknown contrast written at each spectral position, at each point in Fourier space. It is unknown at this point, and it is also a function of the image slices from 1 to nz. So we've got nz unknowns in this equation. But I don't have only one equation for that. I actually have n omega times nt equations for this unknown. N omega is the number of frequency samples. Nt is the type of responses, reflection coefficient, transmission coefficient. So I typically have, for say 10 slices, I have like 100 equations. And so I've got a tall system of equations, but a small system that allows me to recover the contrast function in Fourier space. Once I have recovered the contrast function at each point in Fourier space and at each range location, I can apply slice by slice to the inverse Fourier transform and get my complex permittivity as a function of real space, x, y, z. That's it. Now, let us talk a little bit about the computational efficiency of solutions in Fourier space, which includes, of course, holography. We already said that we are solving a system of equations like this that is actually summarized in a matrix form here. The unknown contrast row is here. And the first question to ask here is how many such small systems of equations we are solving? Well, if we have nx samples along x and ny samples along y, the theory of FFT is telling us that we are also going to have nx samples along kx and ny samples along ky. So we need to solve nx times ny such systems. But the systems are small. Number of rows nt and omega anywhere between typically 10 to 100. nz typically between 3 and 10. So these are small systems of equations that are solved in no time. And in fact, with this approach, we can recover up to 1 million of voxels, the complex permittivity at 1 million of voxels within 2 to 3 seconds on a laptop using MATLAB algorithm that is not optimized and not parallelized. The computational complexity in terms of voxels is shown here. Now, if I were to discretize and solve this volume integral in real space, I would obtain a single system of equations, which is humongous because it will have a number of rows in the system matrix, which is my data points, on the order of 1 million, and my voxels also approaching 1 million typically. And I will have to wait for days for this system to be solved. In fact, you can appreciate from the computational complexity expression here, the fact that the reduction of computational time compared in Fourier space compared to real space is on the order of nx ny squared, which is essentially 10 to the order of 8 to 10, depending on how many samples you have in the lateral direction. That is why the acceleration is so dramatic. Let me now go into some examples. Here you see an example that elucidates the importance of measuring the point spread function in the near field. This is an experiment that we carried out some time ago, and this is a sketch showing the measurement setup, 1 transmitting, open-end waveguide, and 5 receiving. This is WR90 waveguide with a cutoff of 6.56 gigahertz. You will see that we've done a sweep from 3 gigahertz to 20 gigahertz, essentially going below the cutoff of the antennas. And that is because we found out that due to the very close proximity of objects to the antennas, actually we can take advantage of evanescent fields, which also provide better resolution, by the way. And so if we are using evanescent fields at frequencies below the cutoff of the waveguide antennas, there is no way we can employ analytical expressions like this one. Not to mention that at the high end of our frequency band, the objects are actually in the near zone or the Fresnel zone of the antennas that is below the far zone limit of the antennas. And so in this case, we cannot use analytical expressions. We try to use simulations because we can simulate the incident fields of rectangular open waveguide antennas. These are very quick and simple to simulate. And then we carried out our measurements with the crosses in styrofoam. We used the simulated incident fields to construct our PSF, and we got garbage. We couldn't image anything. We attribute that to the fact that our simulations, which by the way were very accurate, mesh convergence error below 0.01%. And so the problem is that in the measurement, we have all this stuff around the measured object that reflects plexiglass plates and connectors and plastic rods and whatnot. And this is not taken into account in the simulation. But if we measure the PSF using this little cutout of copper sheet, and then we use the measured PSF, and now we can get some images of the crosses. Of course, we have also artifacts in the slice, the image slices that are in air, especially strong here, which is due again to the linearizing approximation. This slice, by the way, is between this large metallic array here and the cross right here. There is a lot of multiple scattering happening between this cross and the antennas, and this is causing a very strong artifact at the center of this image slice. Let me also show you now some near field again experiments, again with real-time imaging of a breast phantom. What you see here is a 5.5 centimeter flattened breast tissue phantom, which is constructed from carbon rubber sheets that are custom made to emulate the electrical properties, real and imaginary part of an averaged scattered fibroglandular breast tissue. What we did, we kept 3 of these sheets, the first, the third, and the fifth, the way they are. And then the second and the fourth, we hollowed out a significant portion, just enough to fit in a Petri dish. And then we started filling the Petri dish with various tissue mimicking materials. And what you see in this particular phantom in layer 2, the brownish substance, is yet another substance that emulates averaged breast tissue properties. You see these 2 values are very close to each other. And there are 2 tumor simulants that are touching each other. Each is about 9 to 10 millimeters. And then in layer 4, we have a fibroglandular simulant, which emulates fibroglandular tissue properties. And inside that, we again put 2 touching tumor simulants. What we used here is the same scanner that I showed you before. We used a TEM horn, which is now getting quite old, for transmission. It is a TM horn antenna specifically designed to operate with tissue. And we use our 9 bow tie antenna array, which is also specifically designed to operate with high permittivity tissue phantoms. And so here, let me show you first the CT images. We took the phantom to the medical school at McMaster, and there they imaged it with a medical CT scanner. This is an X-ray imaging device. It has very high resolution, higher even than magnetic resonance machines. And you can clearly see in those layers, second and fourth here, by the way, CT produces 3D images slice by slice. And of course, superb resolution, including the air bubbles that we couldn't drive out of our tissue mimicking substances. We cannot compete in terms of resolution with X-rays, but here are the microwave images that are reconstructed within milliseconds with quantitative microwave holography. which is projecting all the permittivity values onto one plane. We clearly can see the tumor simulants. The estimated values are lower than the actual values of the tumor simulants because these are projected values that go through 5 layers. And here is the imaginary part correctly showing very high loss in the region of the simulants for the tumors. We also have in our suite of real-time imaging methods, a method that we developed at McMaster, scattered power mapping method, and it actually shows even better resolution. You can actually see that there are 2 objects here. The vertical ones we cannot distinguish at all, but that is also because they are hard pressed against each other, which you can see in the city image as well. And finally, we're approaching here the end of the talk. I would like to show you some of the results of a collaboration with the University of Electronic Science and Technology in China, Chengdu, where they developed, quite impressive actually for an academic team, a planar whole body scanner in the frequency band between 27 gigahertz and 32.8 gigahertz. This is a linear frequency modulation radar, chirp radar. And using a microwave holography, qualitative with analytical PSFs, quite impressive results. Again, images that contain millions of voxels. These are projected to the images, reconstructed well below 1 second. Here you see a volunteer and with 3 objects hidden in clothing. Actually, the cell phone is the pocket and these knives are under the jacket, and you can see all 3 objects. In fact, I can tell you, young man, the PhD student who spent with us 1 year, he always puts a little dime in the pocket of his volunteers, and you can actually see the little dime here. Really very good results. And this is another measurement on another volunteer with a handgun, cell phone, and another knife at the back. And so let me conclude this talk. Of course, you are aware that we have only grazed the surface of an extensive subject. There is enormous interest, particularly in real-time microwave imaging. That is because this is the imaging that is much desirable in commercial applications. A lot of research and development is currently done on the development of hardware, particularly the development of large imaging arrays. These arrays are not only antennas, as I said before, but antennas that are equipped with RF electronics. Each antenna is a little radio. And so this is a very complex, very challenging task. A lot of research is being done on calibration methods, measurements of small probes and whatnot, in order to get to know your system better and thereby de-embedding its errors from the image. Many PhD students and researchers are working on image reconstruction methods, not only real-time reconstruction based on linearized model, but making the inversion methods that are based on nonlinear models work faster. And so in conclusion, I would like to essentially say that imaging and detection is the true frontier of future wireless technology that will lead to new guiding and navigation systems for autonomous vehicles, new methods for medical diagnostics, non-destructive testing, security, and surveillance. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this talk. I'm ready to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Nikolova. That was a great presentation, starting from the very basic concepts of near-field imaging. So as Professor mentioned, you can start post your questions in the chat and we will read it to Professor, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question yourself. Okay. While we are waiting, I'm sure some people are typing. Actually, somebody unmuted themselves. Okay.
So I had a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Awesome. So thanks a lot for the very informative presentation. I'm just trying to look at this slightly with a different angle. So in slide 8, you mentioned that there is a need for abundant number of images and generally imaging problem. And I'm just trying to see that what's your vision in immersion of machine learning algorithms that could generate so many images for you in this process. So for instance, GAN networks, generative adversarial networks, are able to create fake images as nearly as good as real images that could be used to generate to the whole resource that you would need for imaging. How would that come into play in this whole imaging in the future?
Right. If I understand the question correctly, it is whether we can employ machine learning into eventually substantially reducing the number of data samples that are required to generate an image, for example. And this is a huge area of research at the moment. The use of machine learning for image reconstruction. That is because also machine learning can be augmented with preliminary training with very time-consuming but very information-rich simulations. And then machine learning can also learn, that is, from added measurements and improve its performance over time. And eventually, hopefully, reach a stage where with very few measurements for a given system, the algorithm can produce very high quality images. So initially, I believe that the abundance and diversity of data is still necessary. However, machine learning can improve the images over time and also reduce the amount of data required to obtain an image, and that is important. Did I answer actually your question?
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other question from the audience?
I have some questions.
Go ahead.
So it's an impressive talk, and I want to know that is it necessary that the sample needs to be parallel to the array when you do the non-destructive testing?
Could you repeat the question?
Is it necessary that the sample needs to be parallel to the array when you do the non-destructive testing?
No, it does not have to be no. Certainly, but you are asking a very important question, and that is with regard to orientation of the scattering object with respect to the antennas. Let me come back here. It is very important to illuminate the scatter well in order to get a strong scattering response. And so depending on the orientation of the camera or the orientation of the scanner, yes, you would obtain better images if your object is well exposed to the radiation. But strictly speaking, the orientation, the object can be under any orientation in order to obtain good 3D images. The only problem would be in real-time imaging, where the linearizing model does not take very well into account multiple scattering between the antenna and the surface of the object. And so in near field, non-destructive testing, it is better if the object actually assumes a position where the scattering is stronger, so that the second order multiple scattering effects are subdued. They're weaker than the scattered portion of the S parameter or whatever we're measuring. So does this answer your question? So the short answer is theoretically no. It doesn't matter how it's oriented. In practice, yes, it does matter, especially for real-time imaging.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And I have another question. So can you comment on the resolution improvement in the future?
Now, resolution with far zone measurements is definitely limited by the wavelength. And I think that I've got some of the even estimates here. Let me get to my slides. Do you see that slide here? I didn't comment on that, but these are the estimated lateral and depth resolution. The depth resolution depends on the bandwidth of the signal. The lateral resolution, I'm talking here about planar scanning. The lateral resolution depends on the minimum wavelength. However, these are limits that essentially are diffraction limits coming from far zone approximations. If you have evanescent field information, that is, if you're measuring very, very close to the object, and these are actually very, very close to the object, you may be able to get better resolution. Theory tells us that the faster the field changes in real space, the better resolution, that is the incident field, that is an evanescent incident field, the better resolution of your images. So, number one, you can exploit evanescent field information, but to do that, you have to be close to your object, because evanescent fields, as you know very well, decay very fast with distance, at least in most applications. And so you cannot measure them. It's that simple. They drop below the noise level of your system. On the other hand, I have seen quite a few papers recently that claim that they can achieve super resolution, that is, they can drop below the diffraction limit by using machine learning. Now, I am not particularly convinced that this is possible, but some very solid experiments point to the fact that for a particular system, for a particular training approach, yes, mathematics can help improve the resolution. But strictly speaking, as dictated by physics, it is evanescent field information that can allow you to beat the diffraction limit. All right?
Thank you for your answer. Yeah, it's very clear. Yeah.
Well, maybe I can ask a question here.
Sure, go ahead, Parinas.
So you mentioned at the very beginning that some imaging artifacts happens when there is multiple scattering between the different parts of the object itself.
Correct.
So yeah, at the end, like there was a practical experiment with the human being or a student, PhD student, that didn't have that, and I noticed like maybe the shape of the hands and obviously the distance between the legs were different. But in general, when we can break the object or don't have that flexibility, do you think if there is a way to avoid these artifacts, like using time gating maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, time gating is a widely used approach in pulsed radar. But now the whole body imagers are not pulsed radars. They are either, more than often, they're chirp radars, linear frequency modulation, or there are frequency hop systems. But the reduction of the artifacts certainly can be done by improving the point spread function, the kernel of the equation, or performing calibration measurements that particularly target the embedding of artifacts. Ultimately, if your model is inaccurate, this inaccuracy is going to leak into your images. It really is a very simple principle. So what is a difference between total field and incident field immediately becomes contrast because the two are multiplied. If I put here an incident field, then everything that differs from an incident field will be transferred onto my contrast. And so only calibration measurements, in my opinion, can resolve this issue, or full-blown nonlinear reconstruction method. So that the nonlinear reconstruction method that recovers not only the permittivity, for those of you who have dealt with imaging, but also the distribution of the field inside the object. The two processes go hand in hand and they update each other. But it takes time because you need electromagnetic simulations. You need proper modeling of the dependence of the total field on the current iterates of the object contrast. So yeah, I would say that the only solution is smart calibration. If you have a poorly estimated kernel, you either have to have very smartly designed calibration measurements, a lot of people are working on that, or you forget about real-time imaging and you go for full-blown nonlinear solution of your inverse problem. Even that can be done currently within several minutes with quite a few voxels. So people are working on that. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question from the audience? Okay, there is one question. Oh, actually, sorry, this was sent to me privately. This wasn't a question for you. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's all right.
I actually can ask a question.
Sure, George.
Well, this is excellent, Natalia. Thank you very much. I just don't. We had we had a recent seminar about some work that is being done in optics, where I think they use some pulsed LiDAR, and they can reconstruct images around the walls. So like in the non-line of sight, but with light. So with light, it's very impressive because you think you cannot see anything around corners. But I was wondering when I was looking at that presentation, well, can this be done just with millimeter waves or microwaves? So with you, in your experience, won't this be quite straightforward to just have an object around the corner and by bouncing the waves on the wall, you can just reconstruct the image?
I'm pretty certain that it can be done as long as we have wavelengths that can diffract along the corner. As long as I have a signal, absolutely this can be done. I don't know who would be interested in that, but sure, these are objects that are not visible, so strictly speaking. Now, talking about corners, you know, if that's a drywall, the microwaves will just go through it. But it would be interesting to see if we have, say, millimeter waves. They don't go very well through brick and drywall. But I'm pretty sure that as long as the radiation reaches the object and the signal strength is measurable, definitely the analytical models can take care of it and an image can be reconstructed. That is my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Natalia. That was a great talk, and thank you for coming. And I thank Arinas also for organizing this.
Well, you are all very kind. I thank you very much for the kind words regarding my talk. And I certainly hope that I have excited a lot of the young people to get into this research. Certainly a lot of hiring is currently going on, especially in the automotive sector, for people who understand radar imaging, this sort of thing, because all these autonomous platforms, they require all sorts of feedback, not only optical, but also radar and millimeter wave. They're even talking now about microwave sensing on cars. I don't know what that is going to accomplish, but people are looking at various options. And so people with knowledge about image reconstruction methods or radar hardware are really sought after. So do your best to learn electromagnetics and antennas. This is what I have to say.
Thank you very much. Yes, it was. We are very excited to share the video with the audience, and I'll talk to you about sharing it publicly later to you. But yes,
Not a problem. Not a problem at all.
thank you very much. It was truly a pleasure to have you here today. And if nobody has a question, I guess we can say goodbye.
Yes, I am going to stop sharing, and I can wave goodbye to everybody. I do hope to see you in person. You have a good weekend, all of you.